So I'd like to show you an example of what it might look like to do a heuristic evaluation. This is just one of the ways you can do it. I actually chose the Airbnb app because it's one of my favorite apps. So it's not an app I've had a lot of trouble with. It's not one that has lots of issues, and yet still there are things that could possibly cause trouble for users, which is really one of the reasons for doing a heuristic evaluation, is just to go through based on some principles sort of in the field and say where might users get tripped up because the design doesn't comply with these standards or these principles that we've decided are important. I chose to pull up Jacob Nielsen's list of usability heuristics, and of the 10 that he has, I selected 5 that I'm going to walk through and evaluate the Airbnb design to those 5. And the 5 that I selected are visibility of the system status, match between system and the real world, user control and freedom, recognition rather than recall, and aesthetic and minimalist design. So one of the things I like to do before really delving into the heuristic evaluation is just to kind of look around and click on a couple different things, see what I can do, see what the options are. And already here I'm noticing that it's giving me feedback that something's happening, it's loading, it's working. And so I already off the bat see visibility of system status. So these are listings in Los Angeles. I can kind of look through different ones. I noticed the little heart icon, which I'm thinking I know what it means, maybe because I'm familiar with the app. Not sure if everyone would know what that means, and that it kind of saves it to your favorites. And I'm also going to go back to the beginning. Seeing the heart just now reminded me of the icons that I had seen sort of on the first screen. And this kind of brings up match between system and the real world. And this comes down to making sure that whatever you have in the design is clear and understandable. I talked about information sent in one of the lessons in this class, which is very much related to this. And icons are actually one of the things that tend to not have a great match to the real world. But if you kind of look at them, the envelope, we have a pretty strong association to mail and an inbox. So that one's pretty good. Of the other ones here, like a heart is maybe something you might love. What these other icons do or where they bring you might not be immediately obvious. So this is one of the ones where I might make a note to say like could potentially cause problems because it doesn't exactly match the system and the real world, what we might expect to see. So let's actually go back in. Palm Springs seems like a nice place to go. So again, we see the loading icon. Depending on when you use this, you might not see it at all. So if you have a strong Wi-Fi connection, you might never see that, but they've designed it in there, which is really good. So it's giving me feedback, which as a user, I know I really need. It's like I tapped something, I want to make sure it's still working. It's not totally crashed, and I don't have to restart the app. So those are our first 2. User control and freedom is another heuristic that I find really helpful to think about, and it's making sure that I'm not forcing users as a designer. I'm not forcing users to go down one path. I'm giving them lots of different ways to use the app. And so I can select a city like I just did. I can search for a city. There's lots of different ways to do that. So going back into Palm Springs, I can select a date that I might want a listing on, how many guests that I want. And all of these are things that are giving me as a user control and freedom to search in a way that I want to search. And so I'm going to save those filters. Again, I see that it's doing something. It's hopefully listening to what I want it to do. And so I feel like I'm in control of searching. Airbnb could have decided that they just wanted to show me a bunch of listings or only let me search by a city, and then I'd have to go through, but I could actually narrow down the options, which is really helpful. As I'm going down here, this is actually another really good thing. And I realized as I'm using the iPhone app, I've also used the Android app, and the iPhone app actually does something really interesting that the Android app doesn't do. On the Android app, I don't see a reminder. It doesn't remind me what filters I selected, whereas I'm seeing that here on the iPhone app. It's saying at the top, December 3rd to December 12th, 4 guests. If I did a shared room, I'm curious now if it's going to show me that too. It still just gives me some of that information. And this actually relates to recognition rather than recall, which has to do with not making users rely too much on their short-term memory. If users are making a bunch of comparisons or doing multiple tasks on different screens, it's really hard to remember what they chose and selected on one screen when they're on another screen, or if they're comparing multiple listings to each other. And so in this case, I made a bunch of filter selections, and the iPhone app is actually doing a really good job reminding me. So it's requiring me to use recognition rather than recall in what filters I selected up to a certain point, right? So it's telling me date and guests, but it's not telling me that I did shared room versus entire home, or what price range. And so Airbnb chose those two. My guess is that it would probably be worth doing some further analysis and evaluation to make sure that date and number of guests are the two most important ones that I would want people to know that they filtered by. I could imagine price being another really important one. Another thing when it comes to recognition and recall, like if I want to look at this rental, I can look at it, review it, I can go back. There's not actually a super easy way to compare multiple listings to each other, which is requiring users to rely very heavily on recall, because there's no way to kind of easily recognize the differences between two listings. What we tend to see in usability testing when that happens in those situations, or if you were to just watch people in their natural environment, they tend to have a notepad next to them when they're doing this kind of research, where they take notes on the different listings. I've seen this a lot in reviewing hotel sites, where people want to take notes on like price, and does it have a pool, and does it have internet and breakfast. So that's one where it might not be too big a problem, but I could see that being potentially an issue, and something to consider is building in some feature where people can make easy comparisons between products. And then the last usability heuristic that I had pulled out, one that I wanted to focus on, was aesthetic and minimalist design. And this really talks about not having a lot of unnecessary information on a screen. So if you click on a screen, that all space is used wisely, so that there's also a lot of white space, that people don't get overwhelmed by the information, especially a clear visual hierarchy. And this is actually one of the things that I think Airbnb does tremendously well. On the home screen, you see the large images, which are really nice. So it has sort of a good emotional reaction to using their app and wanting to go different places. Also in here, seeing images of focusing very much on the atmosphere at the rental, rather than a whole bunch of information, but still providing you the information that you probably want to know, like what's the summary of the rental, where is it, how many reviews, and then even when you click in, you can tell that they've thought about using the space wisely. What I'm having a hard time in this heuristic evaluation doing is thinking about whether or not this is the most important information at this time. So this is where, for evaluating like a sort of listing detail page, I'm going to call it, I would want to do some more research into users, or maybe either interviews, surveys, kind of talk to people a little bit more about what they need when they're booking a hotel or a rental, but then also a usability study to see if they can actually find a listing that works for them based on the information that's provided here. And so what I've done here is actually write down the list of heuristics that I have and the ones that I wanted to focus on for this review, and then made some notes as to what is and isn't working. Another way that I might present this is to take some screenshots of the app and then actually take notes on the screenshots. So I could have even not had the live app and just had different screens and just kind of marked it as I was going. The easiest way to do a heuristic evaluation is to just, once you've decided on your list of heuristics that you want to use in this evaluation, and pick one and use the system thinking about that one and what is and isn't working, or might cause trouble, where the design might be not following this guiding principle. You might, as you're doing that, kind of notice that there are things related to other heuristics, and it's totally okay to take notes on that, but it can get really overwhelming to just kind of start using the app and thinking about all the heuristics out there. And so going one by one is a really nice way to break this down. I think if it's overwhelming to look at the whole app, what you could do is just pick out a couple screens, or focus on maybe one or two tasks. So I could have said for Airbnb, finding a rental that meets my needs is probably the most important. Another really important one is actually being able to go through the booking process, but just reviewing different listings. So I could decide to narrow my focus on just, when comparing and looking at listings, does the design match up and meet these principles, rather than thinking about everything. And I didn't, in this sort of demo evaluation, look at everything and all possible features. That's one way to kind of break it down. Doing heuristic evaluations definitely gets easier over time, and there's actually quite a few usability experts in the field who don't think that anyone should do them. What especially helps me in doing them is that I've done a lot of usability testing. So I've done a lot of research. I've done a lot of research just observing people using technology, both on the phone and on laptops or desktops, and then doing a lot of usability testing. So I also know what typical behavior is when people are shown certain design elements or certain implementations of design elements. It can be hard to sort of delve into this, but even without any experience of how people use technology, you can follow these principles and say, I think this is doing a pretty good job, and even just you thinking that it's doing a good job, there might be ones where you're like, there's something here that's not quite right that I think we should look at. And even if all this does is bring up a discussion with your team, that would be incredible and be a really positive outcome of this. If you're interested in truly getting feedback from users and not walking through the system yourself, either because you're the one that designed it and it's really hard for you to take a step back, or because you don't feel confident in the type of feedback that you think you're providing through this heuristic evaluation, I encourage you to run a usability study. And I've actually included resources with this class on how to run your own usability study, either in person moderated with a participant that you've recruited, either a friend or family or someone who actually uses your product, or using the UserTesting tool. And so I've included a lot of resources on how to do that, some ideas for tasks to use for that, which can be a great way to learn more about how your product is doing in terms of usability.